I don't know how to say it, but I guess it was extreme at that point, extreme enough for me to need professional help. My body weight was extremely low. I was very sick. And at that point, there was no denying that I was suffering and that I needed more support than, I wasn't capable of looking after myself anymore.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Becky Ezekiel, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. So today's episode is entitled The Torment and Torture of Eating Disorders. In the UK, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, also known as NICE, suggests that 266,000 people in the UK aged over 16 have anorexia nervosa, and 444,000 have bulimia nervosa. In 2018-19, 19,000 hospitalisations were due to eating disorders, with 25% of admissions to UK hospitals were children under 18. NICE also suggests that 90% of those with eating disorders are female, affecting 15% of women and 5% of men in higher income countries. Eating disorders have been for many years one of the very few health conditions that I haven't felt equipped to help, which at times has been frustrating as someone who naturally likes helping people. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you today, Becky, on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. So to kick things off, I'd love the Radical Health Rebel audience to get to know you. So can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your background, and a little bit about your personal experience having an eating disorder?
Sure. That was a really interesting introduction as well. And, what you say about wanting to help people and not feeling equipped to, I think that's the general feeling with eating disorders, is that none of us are educated enough on what they are and how to help people with them. My background, I'm born and raised in Bermuda, a tiny island. For those of you who don't know where it is, it's kind of off the coast of the Carolinas, very much by itself, north of the Caribbean. It's about 20 miles long and a mile wide, so tiny population. It's a real community where everyone knows everyone. So grew up here, left at age 12, and I moved to the UK and I went to boarding school, hence the English accent, which is stuck with me now, I think forever. So yeah, I went straight to a all-girls boarding school in Hertfordshire, and I was there until I was 18. Which, was a real culture shock for me, coming from a small place and moving, somewhere new. My dad stayed here throughout. My mum took me and my brother over. So there was a lot of adjustment during that time for all of us, I think. And I stayed in the UK until 2 years ago. So went to university in Brighton, and then worked in London, and then, like a lot of people during COVID, made a move. I was in London, in a high-rise building in a flat, and just assessed my life and thought, this isn't what I'm looking for. I miss island life. I miss open space. And so my partner and I moved to Bermuda 2 years ago, coming up to 2 years ago. So that's a little about my background. When it comes to my experience with eating disorders, it's really difficult to pinpoint, because I guess most people would look at me and say I've suffered and was diagnosed with anorexia in 2019 or 2020. But the reality is I'd suffered with disordered eating patterns my entire life. So going right back to childhood, I mean, I think I was aware of dieting from a very, very young age. My body weight was up, it was down. I was yo-yo dieting constantly. And I guess it came to a head a couple of years ago for whatever reason. And I got, I don't know how to say it, but I guess it was extreme at that point. Extreme enough for me to need professional help. My body weight was extremely, extremely low. I was very sick. And at that point, there was no denying that I was suffering and that I needed more support than, I was capable. I wasn't capable of looking after myself anymore.
Mm. Yeah, I'm guessing that was a pretty tough experience to go through.
Yeah, it was, and I think I was so used to battling weight. My weight has always been a big thing for me. I was overweight for a lot of my life. So right from probably when I moved over to the UK at age 12, throughout my boarding school years, throughout university, I was overweight. And so I lost a lot of weight and managed to maintain a kind of healthy lifestyle. So from the outside, what you would see would be someone who'd lost weight and was living a healthy life. I was active, I was going to the gym, I was kind of eating a balanced diet. But internally, it was a daily struggle. I've never had a healthy relationship with food, never had a healthy relationship with my body. So, a couple of years ago, it was pretty much an extreme version of that. I started exercising a lot more. I took up running and it became obsessive. Then I started eating healthy, but that became obsessive. And I started cutting out entire food groups and, stopped socializing in order to exercise. And that's when things really took a turn. And it was difficult for me, but also I think for those people around me as well, which is a big concern with eating disorders. Is it doesn't just affect you in the physical way that people expect it. It affects you physically, emotionally, mentally, and the people around you.
One of the words that you mentioned a few minutes ago was where you said that at that point you couldn't deny it.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that with people that have eating disorders, there's quite a lot of denial going on.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. For me, the first person to approach me when things got really bad, when I was underweight, was my partner. And he said to me, I'm concerned, you're exercising a lot, your eating patterns have changed, your moods. And I think my natural reaction was to say, oh, I'm fine. I'm just trying to be healthy, and okay, maybe I've gone a bit far. I'll change. You just you write it off. And shortly after that, a couple of friends came to me and we had the same conversation. And I said, I'm fine. I'm just going through a phase, and okay, I'll ease off. I was in denial for a long, long time about how extreme things had gotten, because they changed bit by bit. First of all, I started running what you would call a kind of healthy amount. There was nothing extreme about my behavior. Then that became extreme, and then my eating became extreme. So it took me a while to admit that I needed help. And even when I agreed to get help, I think it took me a while to understand that I deserved to be there. I was having, sessions with a psychologist, and I was saying to her, I just feel like I'm wasting your time. I don't really know why I'm here. There's nothing wrong with my weight. I couldn't even though at that point I was very underweight, I couldn't see it in myself the way other people would see it in me, or the way I could see it in someone else. You're not well. You're not capable of seeing the reality at that point.
Do you know why generally there's so much denial? Do you know where that comes from?
I don't know where that comes from. I think for me personally, my issues with eating have been going on for so long that at first it just felt as if it was just another thing I was dealing with. It was just another day where I'm struggling with my eating or my body. It didn't feel any different to me personally. But I think there's a lot of stigmas around eating disorders that people don't want to be associated with. There's a lot of shame around it that you know, women or men who are suffering don't want to be identified with. And also a kind of vulnerability where you just don't like this idea that you need people to come and help you. That's certainly how I felt. I didn't feel it was necessary. I felt it was really over the top, and I kept saying to people that I just don't need it. I just don't know why I'm here. And it took my psychologist saying to me, you know, if you don't start gaining weight, I can't see you anymore, because I took an oath, and I'm not fulfilling that duty of care to you by letting you come in here if you need inpatient care. And I was so shocked, and I went home to my partner and I said, George, can you believe that she thinks that things are that bad? And he said, yeah, I agree with her. I think you need to have inpatient care. And it took those two people to say it to me, I think, for me to think, okay, maybe I'm wrong in this situation. Maybe it is as bad as they say it is, because, you know, I trust my partner with everything. And then I trusted this professional to do her job.
So in that instance, I can imagine that other people still wouldn't have that. You know, you had a partner and a professional to put your trust in. But I would imagine other people in your position, even if they had a partner and a professional helping them, that they still might not trust those people.
Yeah.
Right. They still might be in denial. Right.
Absolutely.
So what do you think was different in you that kind of allowed you to trust what they were saying?
I think I feel incredibly fortunate for the support I had with my partner. I mean, I can categorically say I would not be here if it wasn't for him. I mean, he saved my life. And I also feel I got extremely lucky with the professional support I had, which was private support. And a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to be able to seek private support. So I think it was the support I had made a huge difference, because I had two people who almost wouldn't let me take another way. So when people are, you know, when your partner is backing you and pushing you to a point, you think, okay, I can't not now back myself. If he's saying to me, you need help, you need this, you know, at some point, hopefully you realize that that person has your best interests at heart. And I think that's the point I got to, where I thought, okay, you know, he's got no motivation other than what's best for me. Let me go, let me see this through. But like I say, I was incredibly lucky to have that, and not everyone does.
So at that point, when you kind of accepted, okay, I need some help now, was that scary for you?
Yeah, it was really scary. I think it's that kind of thing where step one, you're admitting that you have a problem that you can't cope with. That for me is terrifying in itself, because I like to think of myself as incredibly independent, and I like to take on challenges and feel very capable in myself. So I didn't like feeling that vulnerable, first of all. And I wasn't sure what recovery looked like. At that point, I didn't understand what I was going through. So all I was thinking was, oh, everyone wants me to put on weight. Everyone just wants me to put on weight. And it felt like an attack. What I didn't realize is that what was happening to me was so much more than my physical body. My mental health was the lowest it had ever been, and I wasn't capable of seeing that. So it was scary, because I had to put trust in other people and trust their motivation. And that's very hard when you have a voice in your head saying, no, these people, they're just trying to get you to put on weight, and that's not what we want. We don't want to put on weight. It's a constant battle. I think it was definitely for me a daily battle, where every morning I had to choose recovery. I had to choose, okay, today I'm going to listen to my partner, and the professionals, not the voice in my head. And some days that won out, and some days it didn't. But it's not a case of, or it certainly wasn't for me, saying, okay, I'm going to trust these people. Let me see what they've got.
As you were speaking then, I had an analogy in my head of standing on top of a tall building that's on fire. And at the bottom, you've got some firemen, and they're holding a blanket going, jump, jump, we'll save you. Right? It's almost like, wow, okay, I can go back to the fire, and that's not going to end good. Yeah. Or I've got to trust those people down there that when I do jump, they're actually going to save me. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's such a good analogy, because the scary thing is that the voice in your head is telling you that actually the fire is you can probably make it through the building just fine by going through the fire. So the voice in your head is saying, no, don't take that leap. That's too much. It's way too much. It's definitely, I think starting your recovery journey is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Seeing it through is a struggle, but it is the most worthwhile thing you could do. And it's realizing that takes some time, I think, because you've totally lost sight of reality when you're that ill. Yeah. You don't quite realize.
Yeah, it sounds like you were at the point where, your shoes were almost on fire.
Yeah.
And then you thought,
absolutely.
Okay.
It's pretty crazy when I look back, because I think, now that I'm healthy and my brain is fed and I'm capable of seeing things clearly, I look back and I think, why didn't it occur to me that taking 3 hot baths a day just to be warm wasn't normal? I was in and out of doctors all the time about my bone density, about this issue, that issue. I was having heart palpitations. I mean, all of these things that you think would be obvious indicators that you actually are very sick, you manage to talk yourself out of and manage to put down to being about something else. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people do wait until it is at that point where it's do or die until they get help. And, from what I understand of, particularly in the UK, I said to you, I was lucky enough to have private help, but I know some girls who have gone through the NHS and they've been told that they're not sick enough to get help. And that's a real concern, is that, you have to look a certain way to be believed that things are as bad as they are. You know, a lot of the problems with eating disorders are, it's a mental health condition. It's not a problem with food. It's not a problem with your weight. That's a part of it, but it's a mental health condition. And unfortunately, sometimes you do end up being so far down the line before you're ready to receive help, or before other people are almost ready to believe that you need it.
Yeah. That's probably a good place to ask you my next question. Can you explain in your own words what an eating disorder actually is?
I mean, you know, don't take this as medical advice, because I don't know what the exact definition is, but for me, I would say the most important thing to understand is that it's a mental health condition. It's a severe mental health condition, a deadly mental health condition. If we're talking frankly, you know, a lot of people die from eating disorders. It's something that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about. It's something that's happening all the time. I think the problem is that we're not educated about what it actually is. A lot of us think it's just a physical condition, but it's so much more than that. It's a real, I guess you would say it's severe thoughts and behaviors around food, eating, and your body, and that can present itself in different ways for different people. It can be over exercising, it can be under eating, it can be making yourself sick, and you know, you can fall into a box with those. You can tick the boxes of what it is to be anorexic or what it is to be bulimic, but I'd say for a lot of people, you wouldn't necessarily fall into a box, but you are suffering with an eating disorder.
Yeah, so obviously undereating is generally called anorexia nervosa, and then making yourself sick is nervosa bulimia. And then the other thing that we briefly mentioned before we started recording was binge eating disorder as well. Yeah. Which, you know, is interesting because, you know, as I was saying to you before, I've been working with someone for about 5 months. When she came to me, I had binge eating disorder, although that wasn't why she came to me. And when you were saying, you know, people are refused treatment on the NHS in the UK because they don't look sick enough, you know, I can certainly see how, you know, binge eating disorder can become something more serious like anorexia or bulimia. Yeah. You know, but I guess, you know, I mean, the NHS, it's got a lot worse since you left the UK, by the way. You know, it become the national COVID service for the last 2.5 years. Yeah. But, you know, what was quite interesting, I mean, the lady that I've been working with binge eating disorder, even though, you know, if she had anorexia or bulimia, I would have just referred her out. But what was interesting was I was able to help her with a binge eating disorder. And as we were talking earlier, you know, a lot of it comes down to, you know, I see a lot of similar conditions to this, where people, when they were younger, as children, were very rarely praised, but quite often criticised for certain things, and they can become very perfectionist. And as my client was telling me, you know, she'd worked with other professionals before, you know, functional medicine practitioners and nutritionists, etc., and she would follow the protocols 100%, but then stop and go 100% in the other direction. Yes. And, you know, so she would do it well 100%, or she'd do it badly 100%. There was nothing in between. Yeah. It's a real measure of extremes. And that idea of perfectionism is a huge thread with people who have eating disorders. I mean, they can affect everyone and anyone from, you know, whatever your race, gender, background. There's no discriminating.
but there are, I guess you would say, common threads that you can identify, the kind of people who might be more susceptible to something like a binge eating disorder or anorexia or bulimia, because it's really about control. You're really dealing with something else, and you're using food or your body as a way of coping with that other thing. So whether it's stress or anxiety or something traumatic you've been through, it's a way of controlling that. And, you know, if you are a perfectionist, if you do like to do things a certain way, or you are a bit of a control freak, which I am, all of those things, then it feels like a very natural way of coping with those things, is to control something that you have full autonomy over. It's your body. It's you're the one who decides what goes in your body. So it's something that you feel very in control of.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard on a number of occasions is that quite often that kind of behaviour can come from someone that's had very controlling parents. So when a child hasn't been given much freedom to make their own choices, they're very controlled, well, they say, okay, you think you can control me, but you can't control what I can eat.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
There is, you know, I read an article, and it came out a while ago, and I think the headline was something like, "Parents no longer to blame for eating disorders," because a long time ago, there was this idea that it was all about how you've been brought up. And I do think that that is a big part of it for a lot of people. If they were brought up in a very controlled environment, that's their way of rebelling. That's their way of finding something that they can control in their life. So there's definitely something to it, you know, in that respect. Not for everyone. Absolutely not for everyone. Everyone has their own, I guess, their own triggers, their own reasons for their experiences. But yeah, I can definitely see that.
How can you recognize as an outsider when someone has an eating disorder?
That's a really good question, because it's very, very difficult. And I'd go as far to say is that I look around at people's eating habits. I'm very aware of people's eating habits. I can't kind of help it. It's something I pick up on.
It's like me. I can't help if I'm walking down the street. I'm analysing everyone's walking patterns. Right. Because that's just what I'm trained to do. Right. Absolutely.
It's just a natural thing that you pick up on it, and I'm the same. And I think what I've noticed is that eating disorders are very hard to identify from the outside. I mean, there are some things you could look out for, I would think. You know, if someone's attitude changes towards food or exercising, their mood, are they anxious around food? Or do they not want to socialize so much in those kind of environments where food is available? I mean, there are things you could maybe identify that someone might be going through a difficult time, but I'd say it's really challenging because so many of us have disordered eating patterns. I don't know if you find this, but I've got friends who, for example, won't eat, you know, dinner beyond 7 p.m. or don't eat carbs before a holiday or whatever it is. There are all of these food rules that have become so normal to so many of us that we don't even pick up that, okay, they might not be a full identified eating disorder, but that's a disordered way of eating. To have rules around, or such strict rules around what you eat, isn't a healthy way to live. So I think that blurs the line as well. You could just say, oh, but, you know, she's always been low carb, or, oh, she's just doing Atkins, but those things aren't, or they shouldn't be, the kind of healthy way that we should be eating. You know, the coach I worked with was very into intuitive eating. And the more I've learned about that, the more I can understand it, that makes sense. That makes sense
absolutely.
As a human, you know, we're babies and we know when we're hungry, when we're full, and we learn those cues. And as we get older, we start putting in all of these rules, like, oh, but it's lunchtime, so I have to eat this, or, you know, I can't eat beyond a certain time. And we start messing with what's actually something very natural to us. And so, yeah, identifying someone with an eating disorder is very difficult. It's not about necessarily their weight. They could be underweight, and you could be concerned about that. Yeah, it's very challenging, is the way to answer that question, I guess. There's no simple way.
It's interesting what you were saying about intuitive eating. I mean, that's exactly how I try and teach my clients how to eat. Is to get in tune with what your body needs at any particular time. I mean, we call it metabolic typing.
Right.
But what I've found works well, and I would imagine, I mean, it certainly worked well with the client I've been working with a binge eating disorder, is to set core values. Now, that's slightly different from, you know, rules. Because a core value could be, for instance, well, I will eat what my body tells me is right for me to eat.
Yeah.
Right. So getting really clear on core values can be really important for any health condition, to be honest. I mean, in last week's episode, I spoke to Paul Check about what he calls the 4-doctor model. And in the Check system, what we teach is that in order to be healthy, we need to be really clear on core values in 4 areas: our happiness, our diet, our rest, and our movement. And that could potentially be something that would be quite useful as part of a treatment program for people with eating disorders. I hadn't thought of that before. I literally just thought of that as we were speaking.
No, but it does sound like it would be, because you're right. There's a real difference between a food rule and a belief. And like you say, a belief could be something like, I want to nourish my body in the way that I know it needs to be, or I'm exercising a lot, so I need to give my body more energy, or whatever those things are. They're not so much rules that I can't eat carbs because carbs are evil, as they are positive kind of affirmations about giving your body what it needs.
Well, when working with clients, what I try to do is work alongside them to establish their core values. And, you know, talking about carbs, you know, some people can eat a lot of carbs and that's what their body needs. But then there are other people, someone like me, I can just, you know, sniff an apple and, you know, the energy goes straight through me and I'm hungry in 5 minutes, right? Or if I eat, you know, I am someone, if I eat too many carbs, my body will start to put down body fat. But then other people can eat loads of carbs and stay really lean all the time. And that's where intuitive eating comes in, right? It's like, okay, so what does my body need right now? And it takes time. It takes time to learn to listen to your body. You know, I've been doing it over 20 years and, you know, I would probably say I'm still learning because I'm getting older. My body's changing. So I have to make sure I keep listening. I can't just keep eating what I ate 15, 20 years ago. Right. It's
so true. And we get into routines, don't we? We get into, oh, well, that's what I have for breakfast, or, you know, I always grab a prep for lunch or whatever it is. And we don't even think about really what we're putting into our bodies or why. So when we go through different changes, whether, you know, if you're exercising more, you're going through a stressful time at work, or you're just getting older, all of these things impact what our body needs at that time. So I think you're right. It's a constant learning curve, and it's constantly about checking in with yourself and, you know, being aware of what your body is telling you it needs, because, you know, your body and brain signal, I mean, you'll know a lot more about this than I will, but, you know, our body tells us what it needs. We just have to listen to it, and we have to get in tune with it.
And I guess with an eating disorder, you lose that connection.
Totally. You totally lose that. And you override every signal your body is telling you. So when your body's telling you it's hungry, you're telling it that it's not. And, you know, you find a way to override that. You know, I used to drink copious amounts of Diet Coke to have some flavor and to fill myself up without having any calories. Or, you know, I would eat a giant bowl of salad, but it was really just lettuce and cucumber without dressing or without anything on it. So you start tricking your body in these ways and overriding any cue it's trying to give you, to the point where you're so out of sync, you really do have to relearn how to eat. And that was a big part of my recovery, was relearning how to eat in an intuitive way and in a way that made sense for me.
It's interesting, again, you know, one of the things that I always try and get across to people is, if you want to get healthy, just live in alignment with nature. And the more you move away from nature, the more ill health you're likely to get. Now, the way that we're brought up in modern society, I believe, you know, we unlearn how to eat properly. We unlearn how to get the right kind of rest, etc. And what's interesting, when I was a toddler, my mum used to grow runner beans in the garden. And my mum would go out to the garden and she'd see these little tiny teeth marks in the runner beans, right?
Yeah.
Because I used to love raw runner beans.
Really?
Right, yeah.
Even as a toddler?
Even as a toddler.
Wow.
Because when you're that age, you're generally not, you haven't been untrained. You're still young enough to have that intuition. Yeah. And if my mum was cooking something and she was chopping carrots, I'd always want a bit of raw carrot, and I'd eat it. I love raw carrot, right? Yeah. And then my mum would cook the meal and I wouldn't touch the runner beans or the carrots. Really? Because she'd boiled them. They no longer had any nutrients in them.
That is so interesting.
Right? So even at that age, you know, I knew instinctively what was good for me and what wasn't. Yeah. And another story that's similar, a friend of mine many years ago, when his son was probably a similar age to what I was talking about, maybe about 3. I think his son is in his 20s now, so going back a bit. But I remember him saying to me, oh, my son was in the garden and he was picking buttercups and eating them. And he said, oh, don't do that. It's dirty, don't do that. And then he noticed he kept doing it day after day. He'd be eating buttercups in the garden. And he thought, I wonder if there's some medicinal, you know, something in these buttercups. So he looked it up. And his son suffered from eczema. Well, it turns out that buttercups are actually good for eczema. Wow. You know, so...
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. And, you know, if we lived, you know, on the savannas in Africa, and we didn't live in houses, we would probably never lose that. Yes. Right? Yeah. You know, if we hunted and we gathered rather than, you know, going to a supermarket and buying poisonous foods that's barely got any nutrients in it, you know, we just would never lose that instinctual knowing of what's right for us to eat.
That is so interesting and totally true. And the more our lifestyles become the way they've gone, which is that we're all busy all the time, we're looking for something convenient, the more we're being given that by being given more and more processed food that we can just zap in the microwave. And so we're getting further and further away from what's best for us.
I tell people convenience kills. You know, if you look at all the things that we have that make our lives more convenient, a lot of them actually do us a lot of damage. Yeah. They're very unhealthy for us. So you think processed foods, you know, things like sliced bread, mobile phones, right? Our mobile phones, they give off, you know, high levels of electromagnetic radiation. You know, I see people at the gym, they've got these Bluetooth earphones on, not realizing they're frying their brain, right? Because they can't be bothered to plug a cable into their iPhone. Yeah, yeah. You know, even cars, what do cars do? They mean we don't have to walk. Yes. Right. Yeah. So a lot of these convenience things are not natural. They're not nature.
Yeah. we're paying a
right?
price.
And again, I go back to what I said before. The more we move away from nature, the more we move away from health.
Yeah. No,
obviously not everything, but a lot of the instances.
Yeah. No, you can absolutely see that.
Something that you touched on earlier, I think you might want to go into more detail, is to talk about how the medical community in general approach eating disorders. Thanks for watching the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to share with your friends and family, or share via your social media. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new video clips from the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode, completely ad-free, plus premium content, and join the Radical Health Rebel Patreon community, head on over to the Radical Health Rebel Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel. Thanks again for watching.